Ever notice how some products or ad campaigns just seem to get us to change our behavior? Like they figured out some secret recipe for influence? Well, today we're going to break down that recipe.
Yeah, we're diving into Start at the End by Matt Wallaert, and he lays out this really practical process for designing interventions, like things that actually get people to change their behavior. He calls it the intervention design process, or IDP.
And this isn't just some pie in the sky theory, right? People are actually using
Oh,
this.
absolutely. We're talking big companies, Microsoft, Uber, they've used this stuff.
So it's like behavioral science put into action. I like it. But let's say I'm starting from scratch. Where do I even begin if I want to design an intervention like this?
Well, Wallaert says it all starts with what he calls potential insight. It's that moment when you're looking at the world and you think, ugh, there has got to be a better way to do this. Like something's not working, or it could be way better.
Okay, so it's about spotting the gap between what is and what could be. Kind of like, hey, people should be using reusable bags at the grocery store more.
Exactly. But here's where a lot of people go wrong. They jump straight from that initial spark to brainstorming solutions. But Wallaert says you got to pump the brakes for a second.
Oh, so I can't just assume my brilliant idea is actually, well, brilliant.
Not quite. You need what he calls convergent validity. Basically, it's about backing up your hunch with both data and real-world observations.
Give me an example. How did Waller put this into practice?
Well, he talks about this time at Microsoft. They noticed that kids weren't using search engines as much as they expected in schools.
Really? You'd think kids would be all over that.
Right. Their assumption was that kids are naturally curious, so they'd be searching up a storm online. But here's the thing, they didn't just take that assumption at face value.
So they went full-on detective mode.
Pretty much. They dug into the data, like the actual number of student searches per day, and then they actually went into schools and watched how kids were searching for information. Turns out, yeah, kids are curious, but they weren't necessarily using search engines the same way adults do.
Fascinating. So you've spotted the gap, you've got data, you've seen it firsthand. What's next on this change-making adventure?
Time to get super specific with a behavioral statement.
A behavioral statement. What's that?
It's like a mission statement, but laser focused on the exact behavior change you want to see. Like, instead of make the world a better place, you'd say something like increase recycling rates by 15% by next quarter.
Okay, so very precise and measurable.
Exactly. And Waller uses Uber in their early days as a good example. Back in 2009, their behavioral statement might have been something like, when people need to get from A to B, have a smartphone and internet access, and live in San Francisco, they'll choose to take an Uber. And of course, they'd track their success by the number of rides.
So you're spelling out the behavior, the target audience, even the context and how you'll actually measure success. Got it.
Yep. And that clarity is crucial, especially as we move to the next stage, which is where things get really interesting, pressure mapping.
Pressure mapping. Sounds intense.
It's like this, we're going to map out all the invisible forces that either encourage or discourage the behavior you're interested in. What motivates people to do something, and on the flip side, what's holding them back.
So almost like a pros and cons list for human behavior.
Kind of. But we're going deeper than just surface level stuff. And just like a pros and cons list, the goal is to figure out which factors carry the most weight.
Okay, I think I'm getting this whole pressure mapping thing, but can we walk through an actual example? How about something from behavioral economics?
Sure. Wallaert talks about some work he did with Clover Health. They were trying to boost flu shot rates, which is something a lot of healthcare providers focus on.
Makes sense. Getting your flu shot is super important.
Right. But Clover Health was specifically focused on increasing vaccination rates in the Black community because, statistically, they had much lower rates than other demographics.
Yeah, and I imagine there are some really complex factors at play there.
Absolutely. And Clover Health knew that just telling people to get vaccinated wasn't going to work. They needed to figure out the why behind the behavior. Why weren't people getting their flu shots?
So what did their pressure mapping uncover? What were those invisible forces?
Well, it turned out there was this deep distrust of the medical system in many Black communities, and it went all the way back to the Tuskegee syphilis study.
Oh, wow. Right. That was that horrific study where Black men were denied treatment for syphilis even after a cure was discovered.
Exactly. And this historical trauma, understandably so, created this huge inhibiting pressure against getting the flu shot. It kind of overshadowed any of the promoting pressures, like, protecting individual and community health.
That makes a lot of sense. And it goes back to what you were saying before about how important context is. You can't assume that everyone's going to respond to the same message in the same way.
100%. And this is where that intervention design process really shines. Because they figured this out, this hidden pressure point, Clover Health could then design an intervention that was both effective and, you know, ethically sound.
So, okay, we've done the pressure mapping. We know the promoting pressures and the inhibiting pressures. Now, how do we actually use that information to influence behavior?
So think of it like this. We're trying to tip the scales.
So either weaken the inhibiting pressures or strengthen those promoting pressures.
Exactly. And often the best interventions, they kind of do a little bit of both.
What did Clover Health end up doing? How did they actually address this distrust stemming from Tuskegee?
Well, instead of just trying to market the flu shot directly, with ads and stuff, they decided to partner with trusted community leaders, specifically pastors.
Wow, that's really smart. I mean, pastors often have a lot of respect and influence in their communities.
Right. And by having pastors advocate for the flu shot, Clover Health could kind of address that trust issue head on, but in a way that felt really authentic and, empowering.
Did it actually work?
It did. They saw a big jump in flu shot rates in the Black community. And importantly, the intervention itself was totally ethical, right? It wasn't about coercion or manipulation or anything like that. It was about providing information and really building trust.
I love that. I mean, this approach is so cool because it's not just about changing behavior for the sake of it. It's about making sure that change is good, genuinely beneficial for everyone.
Yeah, 100%. Now, this brings us to another big part of Wallert's IDP process.
Let me guess. We've got our behavioral statement, we have mapped our pressures, we've designed an ethical intervention. Time to take over the world.
You got it. Or, well, not quite. See, Wallert's a big believer in starting small first. He calls it doing a pilot study.
Okay, a pilot study.
Wait, a test run.
And what's the advantage of starting small like that?
It lets you test out your intervention, but with a smaller group from your target audience. And then you can really see, okay, what's working, what's not working, and you can make adjustments as you go.
That makes sense. It's better to figure out the kinks before you roll something out on a huge scale.
Right. And another thing he talks about is running these pilot studies in what he calls an operationally dirty way.
Operationally dirty? What does that even mean?
It means basically don't try to make everything super perfect right away. Let's say your intervention involves, I don't know, some kind of fancy tech solution.
Okay.
Well, you could spend a ton of time and money building this really amazing system. Or for the pilot, you can just do things manually, even if it's a little clunky.
So the goal is just to see if the intervention works, not to create a perfect system right out of the gate.
Exactly.
So then how do you know if the pilot's successful? What are you looking for?
You want to see if it's actually moving the needle. So you're looking for a real measurable impact on that target behavior that we talked about.
Right.
And ideally, you want that impact to be what we call statistically significant.
Statistically significant. Remind me what that means again.
Basically, it means the results you're seeing, they're probably not just due to random chance. It's a good sign that your intervention is actually making a difference. Wallaert suggests aiming for a p-value of less than 0.2.
Okay.
Which basically means there's an 80% chance that your results aren't just a fluke.
Oh, okay. Got it. So you've run your pilot, the data's good, you feel good about it. What's next?
Time to level up. Move from that pilot to a more formal test with a bigger sample size this time.
Okay.
This is where you'd also implement all those operational improvements, like maybe build that fancy tech solution just to make sure that everything can run smoothly, even at a much larger scale.
So it's not just testing the intervention itself, it's testing your ability to actually deliver that intervention.
Exactly. And throughout this whole process, you're always thinking about the cost versus benefits, making sure the positive impact is worth the resources you're putting in, being smart about it.
Which is what it's all about, right? I mean, at the end of the day, it's about making a real difference, which is what this whole intervention design process is all about.
Absolutely. Taking that initial spark, that potential insight, and then, turning it into something real, an intervention that creates positive change. But there's one more really crucial piece here.
We can't forget about ethics, right? It's not like we're just going to run around using this behavioral science stuff to manipulate people.
Oh, for sure, for sure. Wallert's really big on that. He says ethical checks, there shouldn't be an afterthought. They got to be built into the whole process from the get-go.
Okay, so what does that look like? What questions should I be asking myself throughout this whole intervention design process to make sure I'm not going off the rails ethically?
Well, first and foremost, does the behavior I'm trying to encourage, does it actually line up with what my target audience wants and needs? If you're trying to nudge people towards something they really don't want, That's not cool. That's crossing a line.
Right, right. It should be about empowering people, not manipulating them.
Exactly. It's got to be a win-win. And you also want to think about the cost-benefit analysis, but not just from like a big picture standpoint. You got to look at it from the perspective of the people who are actually going to be affected.
Okay, so walk me through that. What do you mean?
So ask yourself, will the benefits of this change actually outweigh any potential costs or downsides for the individuals involved? And this is where it gets a little tricky because sometimes there can be unintended consequences. You got to think long term.
Right, so even if your heart's in the right place, an intervention could kind of backfire if you haven't really thought it through.
Yeah, exactly. And finally, transparency is huge. Be upfront with people. Like, are my motivations clear? Are my methods clear? People deserve to know why and how their behavior is being influenced, even if it's subtle.
It all comes down to respect.
Yeah.
Respect for the individual, respect for their choices.
100%. The IDP, it's not about tricking people. It's about working with them to make positive changes that benefit everybody.
This has been awesome. We've covered so much ground, from those light bulb moments when you spot a problem to actually designing interventions that work ethically, of course.
And the best part, you don't have to be like some behavioral science whiz to use this stuff. Anyone can do it.
Seriously, folks, if you can use this to get your kids to eat their veggies, that's a win.
Hey, why not? It's all about understanding what makes people tick and then using that knowledge to nudge ourselves in a better direction.
So listeners, here's your challenge for this week. Think of a behavior you'd like to change, whether it's your own or someone else's. Now, put on your thinking caps, channel your inner behavioral scientist, and map out the pressures at play. What's encouraging that behavior? What's holding it back? And how can you use this super cool IDP framework to make a positive change? Keep those brain juices flowing. And until next time, happy exploring.